I know I say this a lot, but John Heartfield is one of my favorite artists. He was born Helmut Hersfeld, but during World War I, many of his German compatriots cultivated fervently anti-British sentiment, which Helmut protested by anglicizing his name to John Heartfield. Still during World War I, in 1917, he joined the Berlin Dada Club. In 1918, he also joined the KDP, the German Communist Party. If you watched my video on what is Dadaism, and if you haven't, I highly recommend you do, you'll remember that I mentioned that Dadaism was extremely anti-bourgeois and that the German Dadaists centered in Berlin were highly political. Well, John Heartfield was extremely anti-bourgeois, anti-capitalist, anti-fascist, and he made his political opinions the main driving force of his art. He was radical and one of Hitler's most creative critics, meaning that in 1933, when Hitler took power, the SS entered his apartment, yet Heartfield managed to escape through a window, hid in some garbage bin, and fled to Prague. He became the Gestapo's fifth most wanted man in Nazi Germany. Let's take a look at John Heartfield's anti-fascist propaganda. But before we do, last week I made a video announcing that I was opening an artist residency, and the support and encouragement was astounding. I'm really happy. I'm really excited for that project. So getting some applications for the artist residency and getting some support, donations was really, really appreciated. So if you haven't seen the project and want to know more, make sure to check out that video. John Heartfield worked for the AIZ, the Workers' Pictorial Newspaper, an anti-fascist and anti-capitalist magazine based in Berlin. His work was mostly propagandistic, with the very overt aims of criticizing bourgeois society, capitalism, and fascism, and the printed medium was great to reach as many eyes as possible, with the AIZ reaching as far as 500,000 readers in 1931. Let's introduce Heartfield's work with the self-portrait with the police commissioner Zorgebel, made in 1929. This was made for the AIZ, and it was a way for the artist to introduce himself to his audience. The communist protests of May Day in Berlin in 1929 were severely repressed by the authorities. The police killed 33 civilians, injured 200, and over 1,000 were arrested. The political violence committed by the police not only eroded the country's stability, but gave the event its tragic name of Blutmai, or Bloody May. This is Heartfield's response, a self-portrait with Berlin's police chief, the very symbol of the police force he was criticizing. He's figuratively executing Zorgebel, cutting his head off with scissors, which isn't exactly the most subtle of political statements. However, it's an attack, not a physical one like the police had done, but a social one. It's an attack on the man's name, his title, what he represents, and what he embodies. The scissors aren't used against the commissioner, they're used against his reputation. The action of cutting Zorgebel's image is a great representation of the medium used by Heartfield to criticize. It's a medium he pioneered, the photo montage. I want to look at Heartfield's use of the photo montage through one of his first montages, this 1920 cover of the Der Dada 3 journal, The Tire Travels the World. This is Dada in its purest form. It's playful, it's dynamic, it's in your face. Raoul Haussmann is yelling at you. You see glimpses of advertised commodities, a toothbrush, a wheel, bikes. You see out of context newspaper cutouts. It's all chaotic, it's aggressive, and it doesn't seem to mean much. Heartfield is criticizing the way information was conveyed during his time by creating a parody, a satire of communications at that time. Words, sentences, slogans appearing and disappearing in a blink of an eye, commodities, products, objects fighting to grab your attention and your money. It's loud, it's overwhelming, it's confusing, it makes no sense, it's Dada. Heartfield is using elements of society, appropriating segments of it, and repackaging it to expose the absurdity of it. It's a deconstruction of the media of the time. He's disrupting the illusion of order. There are a lot of things that got me into working with photos. The main thing is that I saw both what was being said and not being said with photos in the newspapers. I found out how you can fool people with photos, really fool them. You can lie and tell the truth by putting the wrong title or wrong captions under them, and that's roughly what was being done. Nothing illustrates this better than this 1930 work, Whoever reads bourgeois newspapers becomes blind and deaf, away with the stultifying bandages. At the time, viewers would recognize the German Social Democratic Party's newspaper, Onward, and would read, I am a cabbage head, do you know my leaves? Whoever reads bourgeois newspapers becomes blind and deaf. Leaves here is a German play on words for newspapers and cabbage leaves. Again, as in most of Heartfield's works, the message is extremely clear. He says propaganda not only narrows your vision of the world, it makes you blind. However, and we can't ignore this, Heartfield is criticizing propaganda through propaganda. He produced partisan images, crafted them to attack his enemies, mostly fascists. We could easily accuse Heartfield of hypocrisy. However, propaganda is an extremely complex and nuanced concept. When criticizing propaganda, I don't think Heartfield is criticizing images that relay opinions or advocate for a set of political ideas or moral convictions. Heartfield is criticizing the kind of propaganda that obfuscates the truth. The kind of propaganda that lies, the one that fools people, really fools them, to make them adopt a position contrary to their interests. Propaganda that raises awareness about propaganda isn't necessarily harmful, and it doesn't necessarily attack the truth. Let's look at another insightful work of propaganda, the kind that propagates an opinion without lying. In February 1932, the Geneva Conference, or the World Disarmament Conference, began with the aims of reducing militarization after World War I. History would show these efforts to be futile. Many people predicted the futility of the effort, and John Heartfield was one of them. On November 9, 1932, in Geneva, a counter-protest was being held in opposition to a fascist demonstration, resulting in the killing of 13 anti-fascists by the military. Heartfield would make The Meaning of Geneva, Peace Cannot Live Where Greed Capital Exists, published on November 27th in AIZ. You see a dove, a symbol of peace, impaled by a bayonet in front of the League of Nations with the Swiss flag turning into a swastika. This symbol is a strong one as it shows not only the violence of the impalement, but also the immediacy of it as feathers float next to the carcass. This is a call for peace, but it's also mourning the death of peace. As the title expresses, Heartfield believes that peace will inevitably die as long as capitalism exists, for peace cannot coexist with the necessary components of capitalism: greed, competition, class division, alienation, and never-ending expansion. I want to conclude this video with Heartfield's anti-fascist work and, more importantly, his anti-Nazi work. Let me show you 3 of them. There's Adolf the Obermensch Swallows Gold and Spouts Tin, an X-ray by Heartfield. There's The Meaning of the Hitler Salute, Little Man Asks for Big Gifts. And finally, there's Hooray, the Butter is Finished, where the caption reads, Hooray, the butter is gone. Goering in his Hamburg speech, Ore has always made an empire strong. Butter and lard have at most made people fat. In this last image, Heartfield is making fun at Goering's speech, showing the absurdity of Nazi rhetoric, but more importantly, the hypocrisy of populist fascists who posture as if they care about the well-being of their population. This hypocrisy is what Heartfield seemed to focus on in his criticism of Hitler and Nazism, at least in the images I've shown. The 2 first images I showed depict Hitler as a paid shill for German industrialists. Heartfield could have criticized the Nazis for many reasons. It's not like fascists don't have a lot to be criticized for, but he chose the route of hypocrisy. Why? The Nazis were lying about something quite fundamental: the fact that they were socialists. If you believe that Hitler or Nazis were socialists, I recommend you watching the video 3 hours made on this subject. However, if your only argument is that the National Socialist Party was socialist because of the name, then I hope you can also argue that the Democratic People's Republic of Korea is democratic. In any case, Heartfield, through these images, might have wanted to prevent socialists or people sensitive to socialist rhetoric from falling in the Nazi trap. No, Heartfield says, even if we're facing social, economic, and political hardships, you can't turn to fascists for solutions. They won't solve your hardships, they'll worsen them. They're backed by extremely wealthy industrialists. Their sole aim is concentrated power, war, and the abstract glory of a mythified past. To them, iron is more important than butter because their insatiable militaristic fever dreams are more important than your happiness and comfort. Heartfield was aware of the tremendous social and economic pressures imposed on his contemporaries. He was socially and politically involved because of these hardships. He made photomontages to shed light on these issues, to denounce those who offered easy solutions in exchange of power, to influence his contemporaries, and to have an impact on the world. Perhaps you might say Heartfield failed. The Nazis took power regardless of his art. Capital and greed, despite his warnings, still promote war almost a century after the creation of his works. However, I'd argue that Heartfield hasn't failed. He still contributed to the struggle against Nazism, being one of the most wanted individuals in Germany. He still contributed to the struggle against injustice, against war, against propaganda, against capital. Heartfield's art is a fight, a constant struggle. And as long as these struggles aren't resolved and his art is still remembered and shared, Heartfield is still fighting. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure to check out my latest video on the announcement of my new artist residency. Thank you for liking and subscribing if you have already. And I'd like to thank, as always, all my patrons for supporting this channel. If you also want to support the channel, check out patreon.com/thecanvas.